Alrighty, welcome everyone to the April version of the Dependency-Track community meeting. Thanks for joining as always. Organizational stuff first. The community meetings are being recorded and they will be uploaded to YouTube within a few days, hopefully. The slides will be published to the Dependency-Track community repository on GitHub, where you can also find the slides of the previous meetings. Please use the Zoom chat during the presentation if you have questions. Maybe if someone can look at the chat and see if there are open questions, just ping me. Otherwise, I will respond to them as I go. Also, there will be an open Q&A section towards the end of the presentation where you can just ask freely, unmute yourself, whatever you wish. Agenda for today, I want to lose a few words about the Trivy supply chain compromise that you may have heard of that happened in the previous weeks. I will give an update on version 5. I will talk about the upcoming releases. I will talk about the support plans that we have for version 4. And then, as mentioned, the Q&A towards the end. For the Trivy supply chain compromise, I just assume now you know what I'm talking about. If you do not know what I'm talking about, Trivy was compromised. The binary itself was compromised. The GitHub action was compromised to essentially a token stealer, right? It would steal your credentials, send them elsewhere. And that's a very, very high level glossing over the details. But because Dependency-Track has a Trivy integration, and we got questions in this regard, the Trivy integration itself was not affected by this because the integration only invokes a remote Trivy server, not the Trivy CLI directly. We do not bundle the Trivy application. You as the user, if you run this integration, if you use this one, you run the Trivy server. That's not something that Dependency-Track is responsible for. So if you use this integration, check if your server might be affected. Again, yeah. There was a GitHub action that was compromised, and we used that GitHub action. So we started an investigation about 1 day after the announcement was made. We published the results of our investigation on GitHub discussions, where you can follow up everything we did, everything we checked, and everything we verified. If you're interested in this, to give you a TLDR, we were not affected by this, but we still rotated all the potentially exposed secrets. And we removed the Trivy action entirely from all our repositories. I think except one, which is the Helm charts repository. And there are no external secrets. It runs just to check if the Helm chart is configured correctly. So the risk is very low, but it was never affected anyway. We took additional actions. For example, we hardened the GitHub Actions workflows. There's a very cool tool out there. It's called Sysmore that you can use to lint your GitHub Actions files. It will tell you all the insecure configurations that you may have. We use that across all our repositories to harden the workflow files. For Dependency-Track version 4 and the upcoming version 5, we enabled immutable GitHub releases. They are not perfect, but at least they will prevent, for example, file attachments of the releases being altered after the release has been published. And because we attached like the jar files, the SBOM files to releases, this makes sense to enable, and it's just a simple switch. So for all upcoming releases, this will be in effect. It doesn't work retroactively for already existing releases. We have further enabled immutable tags for Docker Hub, which similarly means you cannot alter or you cannot reassign a tag of a container image. This excludes at the moment the latest and snapshot tags. Kind of obvious, they are mutable by design. Removing them or discontinuing them would break people's usage of Dependency-Track, I guess. So they stay around. But if you download a, let's say, version 4.14.0 image, it will be immutable and it will not change after it has been created. For the version 5 update, if you tuned into the previous community meetings, you may remember that we said by the end of Q1, that is pretty much exactly today. So you might be asking, where's the release? And you would be rightful in asking this question. Obviously, it is not there yet. If we made it to GA until now, there would be a lot more marketing around it at this point. So let me just get all the excuses out of the way, and then we can then I can give more updates. So the full Kafka removal that we were planning to do, it took longer than expected. That's just reality. While we were doing it, we ran into a few challenges, but we're able to overcome them. Still, it took us longer than expected. While porting some features from version 4 to version 5, not everything can be applied cleanly architecturally. So there were some necessary changes. One example being in version 4, there was this new feature called collection projects, and collection projects are intended to aggregate metrics of child projects. And those metrics were pre-calculated, basically. So whenever a child project got its metrics updated, this had to be translated upwards, right? It had to propagate upwards, so the parent project got its metrics updated as well. And this relied on an internal event bus, in-memory event bus, which is a thing that simply does not work if you are designing a system that is intended to run on multiple nodes, right? Just one example where a version 4 solution didn't apply that cleanly to version 5. Still, we're able to overcome this, but it took us longer than expected. And the version 4 support is eating up a little bit of capacity for potential bug fixes, and of course the version 4.14 release in itself. Excuses, and so bottom line is we will need another month. So by end of April, hopefully we will be done with this. The good news is we still got a lot of good stuff done. And I want to talk about this in the following slides. You can already kick the tires, if you will. There's already a very basic quick start documentation page. There's a Docker Compose setup that you can use. And it only requires the same infrastructure as version 4, meaning Postgres database, which is included in the Docker Compose setup, the API server and the front end. No more Kafka or any separate services. So this should just work. As for the updates, we decommissioned the last remaining external service, which was the repository meta-analyzer service, which is responsible for fetching the latest version of packages or their hashes, their published timestamps. This has now been moved back into the API server. The new architecture has been documented, as all the previous steps have been. If you're interested, you can check the documentation, which means the Kafka requirement is dropped completely now. No more Kafka necessary. We ported the Trivy and vulndb vulnerability analyzers to the new to version 5. We moved the metrics and health checks to a separate management port, which is a concept you may recognize from other bigger frameworks like Spring or Quarkus. The idea is that you have as I basically said, a separate port where you expose metrics and health checks that architecturally that was necessary to make them available immediately on startup. In version 4, metrics and health checks only became available after the application had already started and initialized everything, which means that it appeared to be unreachable or dead until that happened. And if the application takes a few seconds to start, you don't get any liveness checks for that duration. This is now solved basically by having the separate service or separate port. And it also makes it easier to control exposure, because now when you make Dependency-Track available through a reverse proxy or ingress controller, whatever, you can just choose to not expose this port. Easy. You don't need to play around with any path rules or regular expressions or whatever. Also documented how this works. You can change the port if you want. You can change the host binding if you want. Per default, I think it's bound to port 9000. We added more fine-grained control over logging levels. In version 4, what happens is you can enable debug logging, and that debug logging then applies to all the aspects in the system, which means it can become very noisy. And if you're only trying to debug a specific thing, the log noise makes it almost impossible to do. One example being the OIDC authentication. If you want to know what data Dependency-Track receives from an ID token, if you were to enable debug logging and then the system starts logging everything at debug level, it's almost impossible to find what you're looking for. Now you can define logging levels via environment variables and define at the package level. So say you come to GitHub, you raise an issue, and we as maintainers need more information. We can just tell you, hey, enable debug logging for this package, and then tell us what you get there. and it will be much easier to find what you're looking for. Also documented, of course, in the documentation. Kind of irrelevant for most people, I guess, but we replaced the JWTs for authentication with opaque session tokens. So when you log in as a normal user in Dependency-Track, previously we're getting back a JWT. Now you just get back a random string. Again, for normal users, this shouldn't make a difference. But behind the scenes, this allows us to have better control over session expiration. The problem with JWTs is once you have issued them, you cannot revoke them that easily, right? At least not without significant additional burden or additional effort. With session tokens, it's trivial. So if you log out, your session is expired, or your session is considered to be invalid. Also, it doesn't require signing or encryption, which also allowed us to remove the last final local file that version 4, for example, required, which is the secret.key file. And that secret.key file was generated for you on startup normally. It was kept on local disk. You were able to technically or potentially provide a different path to a key that you control or that you generated, but you still had to keep that key on disk somewhere. It was used for JWT signing and for secret encryption, for example, for API keys, for OSS index. But these use cases no longer exist, or we have alternative approaches to that in version 5. So this file is entirely no longer needed anymore, which makes the application now fully stateless, only needing the database, no more persistent volumes, which should make it easier to operate. We ported all the changes from version 4.13.x, which includes the collection projects I mentioned before, but also includes the scheduled summary notifications. We are halfway through porting changes from version 4.14.x, making good progress there. Then we added extensive documentation for policy expressions. I will give you a short snapshot of that in a moment. But also you can look it up here. We added autocomplete for the policy expression editor. I will also give you a short demo of that in a moment. And we added support for SPDX license expressions in the same policy expression editor. Again, I will give you a quick demo in a moment. This expression support handles with exceptions. So an SPDX has license exceptions, for example, GPL 2.0 with class path exception and so on. The support that we added handles that. It can also handle deprecated license IDs. For example, I think GPL 2.0 or later was previously a valid license ID, which now SPDX recommends you write as GPL 2.0 plus. In the support that we added here, you can use the two interchangeably and it will detect it correctly. It will also detect license version ranges. So if a SPDX license expression said everything for, or how's it correctly notated? I think it's GPL 2.0 plus, and we will correctly identify when that also matches GPL 3.0 and so on. So version aware license expression matching also works. That's what I'm trying to say. Documentation here and here. Currently in progress is completing the version 4 porting efforts. So version 4.14.x is being ported. Obviously, documentation needs a bit more work. Overall polishing and bug fixing. And version 4 to version 5 migration tooling. We will offer support for migrating version 4 deployments using Microsoft SQL Server and PostgreSQL. And that is because based on the telemetry that we have, this is what most people are using in production for version 4 currently. We will not offer migration support for H2, for the embedded database. That's just not, I guess technically it would be possible, but we don't want to spend too much effort on that. And the telemetry shows not many people are using it anyway. MySQL, I think the last time we checked the telemetry, 2 people were using MySQL. So that's just not, sadly for those people, it's not an effort to worth spending much time on. One important note here is that in-place migration will not be possible. So likely how it will work is you will have your version 4 deployment, you would create your version 5 deployment, and then we will provide tooling to move the data over. Currently, the plan is to export data from the version 4 database, transform it locally, and then write it to the target database. And so an in-place migration was just not possible for Postgres users, specifically because the database schema is a lot more strict. It uses foreign keys a lot more. It uses unique constraints a lot more. It uses primary keys a lot more. So unique constraints would fire all over the place if we would try to do it in place. So yeah, doing it not in place is the only option here, but it should be fine for most people, I think. If you have concerns about this, do let us know. But yeah, that's the way forward. I would like to give you a quick demo of the policy expression editor, including the new features that we added. We just reshare my screen. So this is the policy view, as you probably know it, where you can select a subject and a violation type in this case. Here you would also be able to select like license. I don't know if you can see the pop over here in the recording. But here are the options that you have in version 4 already, like component age, severity, coordinates, license, etc., etc. I demoed this before, I think, in a much earlier version. But when you select expression here, you can use the common expression language to get a lot more flexibility into what you want your policy to look like. This is a little bit of a complex one. We just remove this. So this is an example of the new SPDX expression functions that we added. What this says is, so when the component has a license expression defined in itself, use that. If it does not, then you can also use the resolved license ID, because an SPDX license ID is also an SPDX expression. So what this says is, does the license expression of the component allow MIT or Apache 2.0? If it does not, then this policy condition would violate and you get a policy violation. What's interesting here is, or what we added now is autocomplete. Let me just add something else here. I hope this shows up on the recording. Please let me know in the Q&A or in the chat if it doesn't. So if I start typing component, it will give me component completion here. I can accept that. Then it offers me all the fields that I can access on the component. But actually, I wanted to show something for vulnerabilities. So vulns is a list of vulnerabilities. If I hit end or if I hit dot here, shows me all the options that I have. For example, exists. So in all the vulnerabilities that this component has, does there exist one vulnerability that I'm aliasing here as V, where just for shits and giggles, essentially, that has aliases, or that has an alias that I'm aliasing as A, where the ID is CVE123. And as in any normal text editor, I can just hit Control S or Command S if you're on Mac, and it will save. And the interesting thing here is that if, for example, you were to mistype something, so you were about to type A.D, which does not exist. If I try to save this, it will highlight the mistake. And again, if I hover over that, I'm not sure if this is showing up on the recording, but it's saying essentially undefined field D, and it will refuse to save this expression. So you get feedback essentially. We had this license, this cell policy support for a while, but the editor for it was lacking, and you were not getting appropriate feedback while you were editing this policy. And this has been polished a little bit more. What's interesting is for SPDX expressions and for version ranges, which we also support, if you were to type a literal, so a literal string in here instead of referring to a component field, we can evaluate them at save time or at compile time, if you will. So if you were to type GPL 2.0 or MIT, whatever, this can be saved because this is a valid expression. If I were to mistype this, I would get an error and it would tell me unexpected token, like essentially invalid SPDX expression, right? So you get, despite the flexibility that these expressions give you, you still get some kind of feedback that short circuit and prevent you from inputting invalid data. Yep. I think that's pretty cool. And I also mentioned the documentation. We added extensive documentation for everything that you can do here. There's a function reference, which includes like dependency graph traversal. It will have examples, including visualizations, what happens if you use them, what would match, what would not match, what they return, what they accept. For the functions that I just demonstrated, there are multiple examples of what would happen depending on which expression or which license ID the component has. Outside of the expression or the allows, does the expression allow a certain license ID? There's also a function for requires. So you could check, for example, if the component has a license expression, does it require me in any possible combination of licenses? Does it require to have AGPL, or does it require to have any kind of deny listed, blacklisted license that you do not want to accept? So this is a lot more powerful than what you could do in version 4. There was limited expression support, but it was kind of behind the scenes. It was not obvious what was happening. Now with expressions, it's a lot more expressive. Expressions are expressive. Who knew? But that is quick demo. And we are planning to do more demos leading up to the version 5 release in a more digestible, in a scripted and more easier to follow way. Let me just reshare my slides here. Okay, upcoming releases. There will be a version 4.14.1 release shortly, mostly with fixes for the ecosystem and distro-aware version matching. It will add support for Composer and NuGet versioning schemes, so it will make vulnerability matching for those ecosystems easier or more accurate. And there will be multiple minor fixes that I was too lazy to list here. But it will be released by this week. It's essentially ready. I just need to get the changelog ready and click the release button, which should be doable by the end of this week. I want to discuss the version 4 support plans for a moment. So version 4.14.x is intended, underlined, to be the last non-bug fix version 4 release. We are saying intended because once version 5 becomes GA, new features which we develop will be added to version 5 and not to version 4. However, the community could backport features to version 4 if desired. And given sufficient community support, we're open to release more version 4 versions, right? We're not leaving anyone in the dust here. But version 4 is planned to receive bug fixes for approximately 6 months past the version 5 GA release. We are open to revisit this depending on the demand, I guess. Or essentially, let's be open to discuss with the community what happens by that time. But this is the idea. 6 months past the version 5 GA release, which should hopefully be next month. We will still release bug fix versions or accept bug fixes, create bug fixes ourselves. That's the idea. But I think it should be understandable that we cannot support version 4 and version 5 until forever, right? We need to cut off somewhere. Again, if you have concerns about this, please do reach out to us via Slack channel, email, wherever else you can reach us. Final note, we will be at the SBOM Focus Conference, which is a BOM-focused conference organized by Anthony Harrison and Ollie E. Johansson. It will be in Stockholm next week from the 8th to the 10th, I think. And apparently I'm giving a talk there on the Fridays, so on the 10th. If you're attending, let me know, hit me up. Happy to talk to anyone, either about bombs or Dependency-Track directly. Yeah, let me know. And that's all for today. Any questions? Telling silence. Okay, then I would say let's wrap it up here. Thanks everyone for joining. Recording will be up in a few hours or days, and I will publish the slides right after this meeting. Righty. Thanks everyone. Bye.